Good morning again. It's great to have you with us. Normally, I would just simply preach a sermon. Today, however, I thought I would take some time and use the media that we have to take a look at our biblical passage today through the eyes of different images and pictures. What we have in front of us is the bulletin from Zion Lutheran Church. It looks a little like Jesus here is in the woods. We know he's riding on a donkey, the symbol of peace. When I was younger, I remember seeing images like this one, in which Jesus is coming in from the countryside, and people are celebrating him by waving palm branches. Several years ago, however, I got a chance to go to the amazing place of Israel. The computer allows us a little bit of flexibility to zoom in to Israel, and I thought it might be a good idea to take a look at the things in Israel. Here we have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the wall around Jerusalem. Here we have the Temple Mount, and up in the distance, we probably have the area that Jesus probably started as he walked towards Jerusalem. And this today is a cemetery, and this is what is called the Mount of Olives. It's probably a little easier to look at it this way, because this is the direction that Jesus probably would have been coming in when he came into Jerusalem. And as we can see from this angle, we see this big cemetery that's there. We can take a look around, take a look at the different parts of this enormous cemetery. And this is the very top of the Mount of Olives. And as we look at it coming in from the east, we can see the Temple Mount and the eastern wall of Israel. One thing you might notice from this picture is the fact that there is a big kind of a ditch. There's a mountain here, and then there's a ditch before you get to this eastern wall. So Jesus approached Jerusalem, and one of the first things he did was cry. If you go to Israel today, there's actually a church in the shape of a teardrop that commemorates this. And you can see a picture of it there, and then a little better picture of it here. Here's another picture of it there. Here is the Mount of Olives that Jesus came down. There's the cemetery. There's probably the road or the area that he came down. And as we take a look at this picture, we can see a couple other things from this vantage point. Jerusalem is actually behind us. This is what people consider to be the Garden of Gethsemane. So you can see all these things are very close together. Jesus came in, and as he approached, there were people waving palm branches. This is a picture of a commemoration of Palm Sunday with people waving palm branches. This is a little different version of that. And we wonder why they were waving palm branches. The truth is, we don't really know. Some will have said that it was a means of showing respect, that they would throw palm branches and other garments of clothing down in front of a person, kind of like rolling out the red carpet, or to show respect. And literally, it was to keep the dust down. This road itself was a very dusty road. It wasn't cement like it is today. And it was important that people not be choked by the dust. Other people, and the Romans themselves, looked at palm branches in particular as a means of showing victory, a king coming in. So it could have been that they were doing either. As Romans, they were acknowledging that Jesus perhaps was a king, but he was on a donkey instead of a horse. A donkey meant that he was coming as a leader in peace. So here we approach Jerusalem. And the one thing that you will notice is that there is one gate there. There's actually another gate way over here, but the eastern gate, some refer to this as the Golden Gate, has quite a steep embankment. And put in front of that today, and for the last 1,000 years really, has been a cemetery. Now you might wonder why the gate is both blocked and why there is a cemetery there. It's kind of a sad story in more ways than one, but unfortunately, when the Muslims came and took over the city, they knew that Jews couldn't go across a cemetery; they would have been considered unclean, and so they put this cemetery here so that Jews wouldn't walk that way, so that they wouldn't try to take the city over. And they knew that the Messiah was going to be coming through the Golden Gate. There's the Golden Gate there. And so they blocked it off. And it's blocked off to this day. It's been blocked off for hundreds and hundreds of years. But in Jesus' time, it was very much open. And it probably didn't look like this. It was probably looking a little different. And one of the things that I noticed when I was there was the fact that Jesus probably came over, believe it or not, to this gate on a bridge. Here we see a different angle. This is the eastern wall. There's the Dome of the Rock. And there's this ditch that I was talking to you about. And this would have been the area that Jesus would have come up. And it probably had a bridge on it. Here is an example of what that bridge might have looked like. We see the temple on the far left here. And we have this bridge that is coming up. And a very small entrance, which would have been the eastern entrance to the Temple Mount. But this is an unusual picture of it. Most create a bridge that looks a little more like this, with several arches that would have bridged the chasm. Here is an example of that. And as you can see here, they've put the temple in a little different place. And here is this bridge. There's also another bridge to this other gate that is still there today. Here is another angle of it, and perhaps putting that same bridge in a different place with the temple there. This is still even another example of a different bridge and a different way of looking at the Temple Mount and that bridge coming in. The reason why I mention this is because whenever I had an image in my head of Palm Sunday, the one thing I didn't have was that of a bridge. And the importance of the actual gate that Jesus was coming in. This is perhaps maybe a more accurate description of what I had described, in that coats were being thrown on the ground to keep the dust down, and that people were celebrating Jesus coming in. Here is a little different image. We see the Golden Gate there, the Temple Mount, and the other gate. They're calling this here the Lion Gate. The pool of Siloam would have been over here where Jesus would have healed the man born blind. And if we scroll down, we can see the different parts of Israel. And to this day, it is divided into these 4 different quadrants. The Muslim quadrant, or quarter, which is up here. The Christian quarter, which includes the Temple of the Holy Sepulchre, the Armenian quarter, and the Jewish quarter. Now, the Holy Sepulchre is supposedly where Jesus' tomb is, as well as where Golgotha is, where he was crucified. And as you take a look at this, you think, well, wait a minute, I thought that Jesus was crucified outside of the city wall. And they believe that actually the wall had changed, that the original wall would have been here. Here is a little better picture of that. We have the Temple Mount there, and then the wall, and then the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus was both crucified and buried. And we can see that the actual older wall would have been quite a bit further in. Taking a little larger bird's eye view of the Temple Mount from the east, we can see the Temple Mount in the distance, the Mount of Olives, and here is the cemetery. Now, the cemetery is quite long, and all the way in the back, if we want to tick back here is probably where Lazarus was raised from the dead, or possibly. I mean, It's hard to know for sure, but in this cemetery might have been where that took place. And as Jesus was coming down, this is a better picture of the cemetery where possibly Lazarus was raised from the dead. There are two places in which Jesus cried. One was after Lazarus had died, and the other one is weeping over Jerusalem. But as Jesus is going towards Jerusalem, he is passing tombs. And we can see that on these tombs is written something that is very familiar to us in a sense. This is the writing in Hebrew, which goes from left to right. And it says very clearly, "You are dust, and to dust you shall return," reminding us of our beginning of our Lenten journey, starting in Ash Wednesday. Before we leave this image of Jerusalem, I just thought I might point out a few areas. Right here is the Wailing Wall. That is where Jews to this day commemorate the old wall of Jerusalem and pray for the return. Here is where Golgotha would have been and where the cross and the tomb would have been. That's where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is. And over here is what is called Mount Zion. Now, it doesn't look like any of this area is a mount or a mountain as we would have thought of it. In fact, going to the Mount of Olives, even going to the top of it, you can do it in literally 15 minutes at a good pace. But throughout the ages, the trenches between these different mountains or hills were filled in, and that is still considered Mount Zion, and that is the area in which the Last Supper would have been, at least traditionally, would have been taken place in what we call an upper room. Here is a little better picture of that outside of the city wall. Mount Zion is, and the church there, where the Last Supper would have perhaps taken place.